if you don't have, and this goes in maybe into the sixth question, but
Yeah.
if you don't have God in the public square, the true God, let's say, then you'll have other gods. So that one way or another, our society will enshrine some orthodoxy, some God, some authority, and the only question is whether it's a merciful and loving God or a furious one like the God of Ibrahim Kindi.
I think this was particularly poignant for my liberal friends who are still struggling with sort of shifting or seeing what I think a new conservatism is. Can you be spiritual without being religious? Because a lot of liberals say they're spiritual, but they're afraid of saying that they're religious.
And that's about 20% of Americans now identify as spiritual but not religious. And what I argue in the chapter is that the problem with that isn't the religiosity, it's the spirituality. That a lot of these Americans do all sorts of religious things. They do hot yoga. They drink only, I don't know, whatever, hot peppers and juice on Fridays or what have you. Those have aspects of liturgical kind of asceticism and self-discipline of the body, but they don't have the shared kind of public account of ultimate meaning that religion brings together. Religion is a combination of those kinds of kind of ritualistic actions with some ultimate account of ultimate meaning. And when you have just the ritualistic aspects, you're doing it just for yourself, and there's a kind of it's private. And there are all sorts of things that happen in traditional societies that take religious ritual seriously that you don't access from that. So I tell the chapter through the life of Victor and Edith Turner, a pair of British anthropologists, completely atheistic, Communist Party members. They go to Africa as anthropologists to study tribal ritual, and they notice that these tribal rituals, as silly as they may have seemed to other anthropologists, actually have this important function in society. They help resolve what would have otherwise been intractable conflicts. They remind the powerful that they're ultimately powerful only to serve the lower, and generally they kind of provide for a kind of humane society as a whole. That's what ritual did. And they ultimately, when they came back to Britain, their assignments were done. They became Catholic themselves because of what they had seen. But what they would have if they had seen our version of ritual, they would have noticed that we have ritual, but it's a very kind of merciless ritual. So, for example, we have a kind of penitential right? If you say something inappropriate on Twitter that's considered offensive and it runs afoul against PC rules, you kind of do what looks like a confession. I confess to my friends that I have greatly wronged through my fault, through my most egregious fault, grievous fault. So we have that. It doesn't have the other aspects that make a penitential rite like that humane and full of mercy and full of forgiveness. It only has the right, and it's kind of brutal.
How damaging do you think it was that in the last year and a half that people were locked out of going to church and to temple? I mean, the fact that they could do some of the stuff privately, obviously, but could not have that public portion of this.
I mean, I tried it. I personally tried going to internet mass, and it just isn't the same. I mean, the mass especially has a kind of embodied element, as Catholics believe that, the Lord makes himself literally present in the form of bread and wine. Virtually it doesn't quite work the same. No, I mean, I think it was a great failure on the part of religious leaders across denominations and faiths, to be honest, that they so readily acquiesced to these restrictions, and kept at it long after it became clear that that there are other risks to be worried about, such as people falling away from faith.
Yeah, well, although interestingly, I think that I'm sensing more and more people coming back to faith now, partly because of all of this. The endless chaos of all of this, bless you, the endless chaos of all of this, I think, has actually led people back in a way. I don't know that it'll be exactly in the way that you would want it to be or that I would want it to be, but I do sense some sort of spiritual awakening right now.
Is that true? I mean, I haven't seen the numbers. I mean, I'd be curious.
I don't know the number. Well, if you look at the numbers, they'll always tell you that there's more atheists now than ever before, and organized religion is on the downfall. But I do sense something else because the secular world went so out of control.
Well, there's nothing like mortality to remind people of the last things, and so I hope so. Yeah, sure.
Question 5: does God respect you?
I think this will. This is a question where any number of people will object if they think that, look, my human dignity is just founded in my being human, my rights. But I argue in the chapter that if you don't think that the human being has some special origin and some special destiny, then why wouldn't you acquiesce to all sorts of political horrors that, for example, disfigured the 20th century? Because human beings are just the product of, evolutionary development and no different from other animals. So, why not have mass atrocities and so forth? So I argue that a lot of people today who clamor for social justice reject religion out of hand because they think it's just a source of oppression. But I argue that the biblical faith, because of the emphasis it puts on the human person as uniquely dignified, as made in the image of God, as Genesis tells us, it's a bulwark against all sorts of political injustices. And that, it seems an obvious point to me, but I know lots of people disagree.
Yeah, what about how religious, or I guess cult-like would be the better explanation, the social justice warriors have become? Do you disconnect that from God, or do you think these things are all tied together?
Well, it just tells me that if you don't have, and this goes in maybe into the 6th question, but if you don't have God in the public square, the true God, let's say, then you'll have other gods. So that one way or another, our society will enshrine some orthodoxy, some God, some authority, and the only question is whether it's a merciful and loving God or a furious one like the God of Ibrahim Kindi.
Right. So that is really question 6, which is, does God need politics? You could have also said, does politics need God, right?
Yeah, I mean, God doesn't need anything, the theologians would tell us, and they're right, because he's a supreme being. But I argue that the God of the Bible, in entering human history, wants to transfigure not just our private lives, but also our public lives. So our cities also he wants to transfigure them. And that historically, societies have always had, as I said, some altar in the public square. And so the only question is which one. And this is my kind of most controversial argument. It's what makes me get called a theocrat in the page of the New York Times. But it just seems obvious to me that, especially in the past 2 years or so, when it's become so clear that the loss of the, a Judeo-Christian orthodoxy, whatever you want to call it, hasn't resulted in a neutral public square. It's just empowered kind of crazy orthodoxies that demand that you bow before them.
Right. That's why I thought this chapter was so interesting, because I came at all of this from a different political perspective than you, and yet I've come to the same conclusion, which is that without God or some organizing factor, and we can whittle that down how we may, this is what you get. The thing that we have right now, where we're debating biological differences between men and women as if they don't exist, that's what you get at the end.
Right. And so I just think there's no situation in which you can say, well, I believe that there are two sexes, a man and woman, as genetics and Genesis tell us, and someone else thinks that there are 135 genders. One of those will prevail. And so I think that a lot of conservative people on my side of the divide really, but also some liberals too, in fact, a lot of liberals, relinquish the responsibility to say, no, there is truth about certain things we can be absolutely certain about, and your interior misperception doesn't amount to truth.
Why do you think so many people folded when it comes to issues like this? Just folded so quickly, let's say. Yeah,
I mean, I think there is a kind of of nominalism built into our philosophy. Nominalism is this idea that it's very old. It comes to us from the medieval age, basically, that certain theologians said, look, the world, what we see is just the things in it are too different to allow any kind of essential classification. Now, none of them would have gotten to gender ideology. I mean, it would have been bonkers to them. But you take that idea far enough and you're like, well, what does it really mean to be a man? And what does it really mean to be a woman? I know what I am, but I can't generalize about that to everyone else. So that's the kind of philosophical root of it. And then I think there's a more basic level. Americans just want to be nice. And so if someone cries out and says, well, I'm conflicted about who I am, I might be something other than what nature or my body tells me, you want to respect that. You kind of want to you want to embrace them, but sometimes that yearning to embrace and be nice can actually be really deadly and harmful.
If you're looking for more honest and thoughtful conversations about spirituality instead of nonstop yelling, check out our spirituality playlist. And if you want to watch full interviews on a variety of topics, check out our full episode playlist. They're all right over here. And to get notified of all future videos, be sure to subscribe and click the notification bell.